for talking about Casamont, the effects of this budget cuts, the crisis in education on black and brown communities. And just so you know, we have lots of information on our info table. All the demands that we're raising here, such as Tony Smith must leave office right now, is available on our info table. Please find out the information. Spread it around the community. Become an organizer in your area and bring more folks back here so that we can stay longer and fight for public education. And so one other demand that we'll be raising up is that we should be funding education, not incarceration. And to speak on this is Kamal Walton.
Hello everybody, my name is Kamal Walton. I am a youth worker. I have worked at a couple of different schools in Oakland, teaching after school, mostly gardening, cooking, food justice, and food sovereignty. And I worked here at Lakeview just last year. And a couple of the students that I know from working here live around the block from me out in West Oakland. One of the things that I want to acknowledge before I get into everything else that I want to talk about is the fact that these schools are community hubs, not just places where young people go to learn the basics and the standardized education that's been set before them, but this is a space for them to connect with adults that are invested in their future. It's a space for their parents to connect with adults and build community and supporting their youth. And by closing these schools, we're displacing those relationships and all of those efforts. Closing schools destabilizes communities all across Oakland that are already suffering with high levels of violence and poverty. And these school closures are criminalizing youth that can't make it to school because a lot of the schools that are closing, which could be possible schools that they would be moved to, are making it even harder for folks to get to those schools. So they're being criminalized for not being able to make it to those schools and could possibly get arrested or charged by truancy officers. And I think that's an important thing as well. As we're closing these schools, we're not making anything else more accessible for our young people. It's important to also acknowledge that while Oakland schools are struggling to stay open, the governor is spending $1.3 billion this year alone to build new prisons and jail beds all across the state. While the state budget had cuts all across, the only thing that actually got more money was prison and jail funding. I think that's an important thing to note. So instead of hiring school police officers or trying to figure out more ways to put cops on the streets, we should be figuring out more ways to get young people into spaces that support them holistically, that support their parents holistically. And that is what these schools could do if we invested in them instead of incarceration. I think that it's important that we ask these questions, that we see how education is connected to the other ways that our communities are impacted by harm and violence, and that we are talking about investing in our communities, not just in schools, but also making sure that these schools are providing our young people with the education that they need to provide them with quality jobs in the future. And I think we also need to figure out and think more creatively about how we connect with each other inside schools and on the streets. Thank you all so much for coming.